and whether blood alone is enough to keep someone safe. I remember the moment it all began, not as a dramatic explosion, but as a quiet, eerie kind of wrongness, the way a house that should have been full of Christmas chaos felt hollow like a stage after the actors have slipped away. I came home on Christmas Day expecting wrapping paper on the floor, my grandchildren's voices bouncing off the walls, and the smell of turkey drifting from my own kitchen. Instead, I walked into silence and found an 84-year-old man in a wheelchair sitting alone in my living room as if someone had forgotten to put him away. His name was Harold Whitmore, my son-in-law's father, a man I'd only ever known as the quiet figure in the corner at family gatherings. He sat near the window in his cardigan and pressed Slack's hands folded over a thin blanket across his knees. The TV was off. The house was cold. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us waiting for the world to make sense again. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "You're earlier than they expected." Confused, I set down my luggage in the hallway, the bags heavy with carefully chosen presents for Ella and Jacob art supplies, video games, little things I'd imagined them tearing into while I watched. "Where are they?" I asked. "Where's Melissa? Where are the kids?" Harold tilted his head toward the kitchen. "You might want to read the note first." The note was on the kitchen counter, propped up against a ceramic snowman written on a cheery piece of stationery covered in candy canes. The message, however, felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Took the kids on a surprise cruise to the Bahamas. Family emergency, very last minute. Harold didn't want to go. Take care of him for us. Back by New Year's Day. Love, Melissa and Adam." I had to read it twice before the meaning really landed. They had left an 84-year-old man alone in my house over Christmas. Like he was a houseplant, they assumed someone would remember to water. And they had done it, knowing I would come home to handle it as if my grief and my loneliness since my husband died made me available by default. My hands shook as I put the note down. "How long have you been here alone?" I asked. Turning back to Harold, his eyes held a sharpness I hadn't noticed before a sly spark under the tired wrinkles. 3 weeks, he said calmly. "They dropped me off right after Thanksgiving, said it would only be for a few days at first." Then the plans changed. My stomach rolled. I had spent Christmas Eve at my sister's house in Phoenix, trying not to feel the hollow ache of my first holiday without my husband assuming Melissa and her family were home safe and warm. Melissa had called that morning sounding rushed. "Mom, change of plans, we're leaving town tonight." "Family emergency," she'd said, and hung up so quickly I didn't even have time to ask what was wrong. I'd taken an early flight back, my arms full of presents, my heart full of hope. And now, here we were. "I've been waiting for you," Evelyn, Harold said as I knelt down beside his wheelchair. "Your daughter and my son think we don't pay attention, but being invisible has a way of sharpening a person's senses." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan with fingers that trembled just enough to remind me of his age, then pulled out his phone and unlocked it with swift familiarity. "Adam forgot. I still know how to use this thing." "Would you like to see what they really think of us?" I didn't want to, but I nodded anyway. He handed me the phone, and I read the messages between Melissa and Adam, each line carving deeper into the part of me that still believed my child would never deliberately hurt me. Perfect timing with Mom's trip. Dad won't know we're gone, and the old bat will be stuck babysitting when she gets back. 2 birds, 1 stone. Genius. She's been so clingy since Dad died. This will teach her we don't revolve around her schedule. My vision blurred. I felt the counter under my hand and held on because if I didn't, I might have ended up on the floor. When I looked back at Harold, I saw my own humiliation reflected there. 2 parents who had done the late nights, and the worry and the sacrifices reduced to burdens, reduced to problems to be managed. "There's more," he said quietly. "They've been planning this for months, Evelyn. We're not family to them anymore. We're assets to be controlled and inconveniences to be contained." The anger that rose in me was cold, not hot. It wasn't the kind that made you shout. It was the kind that made you stand up straighter and see the room with startling clarity. I had been the accommodating mother for so long, the one who swallowed every slight and excused every distance, because they're busy and times are hard. Now, watching Harold's sharp old eyes on me, I realized I wasn't the only one who had decided enough was enough. "What do you want to do?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Harold's lips curled into a thin, predatory smile that did not belong to a helpless old man. I think he said slowly that it's time our children learned what it really costs to abandon the people who raised them. They left us with 3 weeks and nothing but time, Evelyn. I say we use every minute. I straightened, feeling something shift inside my chest, something that had been sleeping since my husband died. "Then let's start," I said. "What's our first move?" Harold glanced toward the dining room where the table waited like a clean battlefield. First he replied, "We make sure they can't take anything else from us. And then, my dear, we make very sure this little cruise of theirs ends in a way they never saw coming." By the next morning, the house no longer felt like the quiet tomb I had walked into on Christmas Day. It had become something else entirely, a command center, built on betrayal, clarity, and a shared determination that surprised even me. I watched Harold maneuver his wheelchair with surprising ease, rolling himself to the dining table with a stack of bank statements balanced neatly on his lap. The early winter sun filtered through the curtains, pale and cold, illuminating the table, now covered with documents, photographs, and notes like the evidence wall of a detective drama. It felt surreal to see my life, my finances, my trust, my daughter's choices laid out so plainly in front of me. As I poured coffee into the good china because if we were going to wage a quiet war, we would do it with dignity, I asked Harold how long he'd suspected any of this. He didn't look up from the papers. "Which part?" he said. "That Adam married Melissa because he knew she'd inherit. Or that they've been isolating us little by little. Or that he planned to put me in a nursing home the moment my usefulness ran out." His voice was calm, almost clinical, but I could hear the hurt beneath the surface. I put the coffee in front of him and sat down. "All of it," I said. "How long have you known?" Harold lifted a folder from the pile and opened it, revealing real estate documents with forged signatures, my daughter's handwriting on notes about future planning, and lists of assets Adam had circled in red. "I may be old," he said, "but people forget that age teaches you how to listen, especially when they think you're too tired or confused to understand what's happening around you. I've been collecting things for months." He slid a page toward me. It was a printed email, Adam telling someone that once everything was set, Harold would be moved to a care facility better suited for his needs. The words were polite, sanitized, the kind of language people used to hide cruelty beneath professionalism. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They were planning to take everything I whispered. Not planning, Harold corrected, executing. Just quietly, carefully, and slowly. They wanted you to add Melissa and Adam to your accounts, didn't they? Joint ownership, updated will. The memories flashed painfully. Melissa insisting she only wanted to help Adam, gently suggesting new paperwork to simplify things. I rubbed my temples. "I haven't signed anything yet," I said. "Thank God," Harold murmured. "Neither have I. Adam's been pushing for power of attorney, claims he's worried about my mental state." I stared at Harold. "But you're completely lucid." He gave a dry laugh. "Exactly why he wants control." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the quiet breathing of a house that had held so many memories, good and bad. I thought of the way Melissa had moved in after my husband died, hovering with a sweetness that felt warm at the time, never suspecting her real motives. I thought of the presents still wrapped upstairs, the ones my grandchildren wouldn't open with me this year. I thought of every small moment I had ignored every hint I'd smoothed over because I couldn't bear the idea that my own daughter might see me as a burden. "What exactly are you proposing we do?" I asked, finally. Harold leaned back slightly, the chair creaking beneath him, his eyes sharp as steel. "They expect to come home to two grateful old people who've bonded over being abandoned. Instead, they're going to find us prepared, informed, and legally protected." He reached into another folder, and he added, almost as an afterthought, "I thought you should know Adam has been having an affair with his secretary for 8 months. The words struck like a blow. Melissa doesn't know Harold continued watching my reaction, but she's about to, and when she does, it'll reveal even more about how deep this rabbit hole goes. I covered my mouth with my hand, overwhelmed by the magnitude of betrayal stacking itself in front of me like a tower of accusations. "Harold?" I whispered. "This is monstrous." He nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's exactly why we can't be gentle." He tapped the table. "First, we secure your accounts. Then we document everything. And finally, we make a few carefully timed phone calls." I exhaled a long, steady breath that seemed to sweep away the woman I had been before walking into that house the day prior. "They're going to be furious," I said. "Good," Harold replied with a smile that was both kind and terrifying. "It's time they learned what consequences feel like." Harold and I worked through December 28th with the kind of silent, determined rhythm usually reserved for people rebuilding after a storm. Papers spread across the dining table like the scattered remains of a life we hadn't realized was under attack. Each document a reminder of how easily trust can be twisted into a weapon. We traced every unauthorized charge on my accounts, high-end restaurants I had never visited, a jewelry store receipt. I didn't recognize vacation clothing purchased with my own credit cards for a trip I hadn't been invited on. When Harold pushed a stack of statements toward me and pointed to a $4,000 total in highlighted yellow, I felt the breath leave my body. "They bought swimwear luggage and new outfits for their cruise with your money," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "And that's just this month." I poured us both more coffee, the 5th pot since dawn, feeling the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleepless nights. "Why are you helping me?" I finally asked, watching the steam rise from my cup. "You barely know me. You could just walk away from this." Harold looked up, and for the first time I saw the full weight of his own story etched across his face. "My wife Margaret died 2 years ago," he said quietly. "She spent her final months in a place that smelled like bleach and loneliness because Adam convinced me it was the smart financial choice. He told me he'd handle everything, promised we'd sell the house later and use the time to give her better care. Instead, he moved us into a bargain facility and kept the savings for himself. Margaret died thinking she was a burden." His voice cracked just enough that I reached over and placed my hand over his. He cleared his throat and continued. "I trusted my son, Evelyn, and it killed the woman I loved. Now I know exactly what he is." I sat back stunned. I had known Adam could be selfish, thoughtless, blinded by ambition, but I hadn't realized the cruelty ran that deep. "Melissa may not know about the affair," Harold said, "but she knew about this trip. She helped plan it. She chose this." That truth landed harder than I expected. All the little moments where she brushed off my sadness, minimized my loneliness, acted as if grief was an inconvenience. It all made sense now. My phone buzzed suddenly, dragging me from my thoughts. A message from Melissa appeared on the screen. "Having an amazing time, weather perfect. Hope you and Harold are getting along." 3 cheerful emojis grinned up at me like little taunts. I stared at the message, feeling the chill of a betrayal that went beyond finances or forged signatures. It was emotional abandonment, practiced and perfected. "They have no idea what's coming," I murmured. Harold smiled, a sharp, almost wolfish grin. "Oh, but they will. I called the cruise line this morning, told them there'd been a family emergency. Their father had a stroke and needed them home right away. I blinked at him. "But you haven't had a stroke." "Not yet," he said with a shrug, "but I could develop very convincing symptoms, especially if someone calls authorities about elderly abandonment. The cruise line already believes the story. They'll be docking in Nassau tomorrow." I sat back, stunned by how thoroughly Harold had begun planning the counterattack. The man they treated as helpless was orchestrating a level of strategy Adam would never see coming. "You're diabolical," I whispered. "I prefer thorough," he replied. "Now the question is, are you ready to stop being a victim?" For a long moment, I said nothing. I looked around my home, the present still sitting unopened, the photos on the mantel, the quiet remnants of a life I once shared with a man who would have protected me from all of this. I remembered Christmas mornings when laughter spilled from every corner of the house, when Melissa still ran to me with excitement instead of manipulative sweetness. Then I looked back at Harold, at his steady gaze and unshakable resolve. "Yes," I said, feeling the weight of the words settle into my bones. "Yes, I am." The next day unfolded with precision. We gathered every piece of evidence Harold had collected over the past months. We stacked my financial documents with new printouts, highlighting charges I never authorized. We organized photographs of Adam and Janine, the secretary. He thought no one knew about images of hotel rooms, dinners, and holiday shopping trips I'd unwittingly paid for. The final blow came when Harold pushed a document toward me, his expression grim. It was a nursing home application with my name forged at the bottom, my daughter's handwriting practiced again and again across scrap paper. "They were preparing to put me away too," I whispered. "Not today," Harold replied. By the time the hospital ambulance arrived, arranged by Harold's sympathetic doctor friend Leonard Hayes, we were ready. I drove behind the ambulance to maintain the illusion of emergency rehearsing the lines Harold had coached me through. At the hospital, Dr. Hayes briefed me on the script stroke-like symptoms brought on by emotional trauma, severe stress responses, possible cardiac involvement. Everything believable, everything recorded, everything ready. Back home, I laid out the evidence on my dining table for Melissa and Adam to find when they returned. Photos, financial statements forged, documents, highlighted timelines, all arranged neatly with a note in my handwriting. "Welcome home. We need to talk. I'll be at the hospital with Harold." By the time their flight landed at 8:47 p.m., I already had 6 missed calls, 12 frantic texts, and the distinct satisfaction of knowing panic had finally replaced their arrogance. They had no idea that their real nightmare hadn't even begun. They arrived at the hospital just after 10:23 p.m., moving down the hallway with the frantic, disoriented energy of people whose carefully crafted world had begun collapsing faster than they could patch it. Melissa's eyes were swollen. Her hair frizzed from the humidity outside, and she clutched her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Adam walked half a step behind her, pale and tight-lipped, his confidence stripped away by the chaos he could no longer control. I waited beside Harold's hospital bed, watching their entrance with a quiet stillness I had never known I possessed. Harold lay beneath the fluorescent lights hooked up to real monitors Dr. Hayes had provided, machines that beeped with just enough urgency to make the performance convincing, though he looked alert and strong beneath the surface. "Mom, what is going on?" Melissa demanded as soon as she entered the room. "We came home as fast as we could." Then her eyes fell on Harold's monitors, and her tone softened into something like dread. Is he okay?" I let my voice tremble just a little, enough to sell the carefully rehearsed illusion. "The doctors say he's stable for now, but it was serious, Melissa. Very serious. The stress of being left alone for so long caused cardiac complications." She swallowed hard, looking at Harold as if seeing him for the first time. "Oh my God, Harold, I'm so sorry. We thought everything was fine. We thought you would be Harold." Slowly opened his eyes, his voice cracking with deliberate weakness as he murmured, "You thought wrong. You left me without medication reminders, without proper food, without checking if I had anyone to call. You left your father alone on Christmas." Adam stepped forward, trying to reassert control. "Dad, come on, it wasn't like that. You were with Evelyn. We thought you'd be safe." Harold coughed once, softly but dramatically, and the heart monitor spiked. "You left a note," he said. "A note telling her to babysit me." Melissa flinched. Adam's jaw tightened. The first cracks were spreading across the facade they had built. I folded my arms, crossing the threshold between the person I used to be and the person I was becoming. "Before we talk about anything else," I said calmly, "we need to discuss what you found at my house." Melissa dropped her gaze, shame washing over her face. Adam, however, stiffened like someone preparing for battle. "It's not what it looks like," he said quickly. "We can explain everything." "Can you explain the photos of you with another woman?" I asked. "Or the tens of thousands of dollars you charged to my accounts? Or the nursing home application with my forged signature?" Melissa gasped, whipping her head toward him. "You forged her signature," Adam sputtered. "That wasn't me, that was." "Don't, Melissa," whispered sharply. "Adam, don't lie to me again." For a moment, the room felt like a fragile glass dome, all of us suspended in a silence too cold to breathe. I watched Melissa struggle with the truth, her eyes darting from me to Harold and back again, her hands trembling at her sides. She had defended Adam for years, excused him, believed him until now when the mountain of evidence we'd laid out could no longer be denied. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the stiff plastic chairs beside Harold's bed. "Both of you." They sat, not because I commanded them, but because the ground beneath their feet had shifted so suddenly they needed something solid to hold on to. "Let's begin with the affair," I said, my voice steady, almost quiet. "You used my credit card to pay for hotel rooms, dinners, gifts. You did the same with Harold's cards. That's theft, Adam. It's not theft if we intended to pay it back." He tried again, clinging to the flimsiest excuse. "Family helps family." Harold snorted. "Family does not financially drain their parents to fund an 8-month affair and a tropical vacation." Melissa turned to Adam with wide, hollow eyes. "8 months, she whispered. "You told me it was nothing. You told me it ended." His silence was answer enough. I reached for my purse and pulled out a folder. "This," I said, placing it in front of them, "is a detailed record of everything you've taken nearly $60,000 in unauthorized charges, cash withdrawals, and personal expenses you disguised as helping. And this," I placed a second folder down, "contains the documentation of the forged signatures, including the nursing home application Melissa filled out." Melissa's face crumpled. "Mom," she whispered, "I swear it wasn't meant to hurt you. I thought you were confused. Adam told me you were forgetting conversations, repeating things." Her voice broke. "He said you needed protection." "Protection," I echoed softly. "That's a beautiful word, Melissa. But that's not what you gave me." I leaned forward, my own heartbeat steady and cold. "What you gave me was fear and silence, and the belief that I was losing myself while you and Adam planned to take everything." Harold added, "And while you planned to put both of us away the moment we became inconvenient." Adam stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're obviously fine. You're both fine. This whole thing has been blown out of proportion." I looked him in the eye, seeing not a son-in-law, but a man cornered by his own schemes. "Sit down," I said quietly. And for the first time since I'd known him, Adam obeyed. "Tomorrow," I said. Rising from my chair, "you will come to my house at 10 a.m. We'll go over everything, and we'll discuss how you're going to make this right." Melissa nodded meekly. Adam clenched his jaw. Harold closed his eyes like a man exhausted by his children. For now, I added, "Visiting hours are over. Harold needs rest. I turned away, letting them feel the weight of what they had done. As Melissa guided Adam out of the room, he muttered, "You don't know what you're doing." But when the door closed, Harold opened his eyes and gave me a slow, knowing smile. "He's wrong," he said. "You know exactly what you're doing." When they arrived at my house the next morning, New Year's Eve, at exactly 10 a.m., the winter air clung to them like guilt. Melissa looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept at all. Adam looked furious, but underneath the anger, I could see something new, flickering fear. Harold was already waiting in the living room, sitting beside the coffee table we'd deliberately arranged like a courtroom exhibit. Every piece of evidence lay in neat, damning stacks. When Melissa and Adam stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind them, felt like the closing of a chapter none of us could return to. "Please sit," I said, motioning to the chairs across from us. Melissa sat immediately. Adam hesitated until Harold fixed him with a steady, unblinking stare. Only then did he lower himself into the seat. For a moment, the room was painfully still, the only sound the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Finally, Harold folded his hands in his lap and broke the silence. "I've been thinking," he said in a tone calm enough to frighten any guilty man, "about trust. How it takes years to build and seconds to destroy." Adam rolled his eyes, but Harold didn't flinch. "My son," he continued, "I trusted you to care about my well-being. I trusted you with my finances. I trusted you to honor your mother's memory. And what did you do with that trust?" His voice hardened. "You stole from me. You forged my signature. You abandoned me on Christmas. And you used my credit cards to fund your affair." The last words dropped into the room like stones. Adam shifted in his chair, trying to find an angle and excuse anything he could weaponize. But Melissa beat him to it. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice splintering. "Adam, did you really do all of that?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. "And you?" I said softly, turning to my daughter, "have been practicing my signature, trying to put me in a facility without my consent, stealing from me to cover your husband's debts, planning to transfer my house into joint ownership." She covered her face with her hands. "Mom, I know it's awful, but I didn't know how to stop it. I thought I was helping. I wanted to feel anger, but what I felt instead was the crushing weight of years spent misunderstanding my own child." "Helping who, Melissa?" I asked quietly. "Me or him?" Melissa didn't answer. "That's enough," Adam snapped, leaning forward. "You've made your point. What do you want from us?" Harold exchanged a glance with me, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I wasn't alone in a battle. I never asked to fight. "Restitution," Harold said simply. "Every dollar you stole from both of us." I placed the payment schedule on the table, sliding it toward them. $59,000, I said, to be repaid over 5 years. No vacations, no luxury spending, no more using our money to fund your life. Adam laughed bitterly. "You can't be serious. We can't afford." "Then you shouldn't have stolen it," I replied. "And if you refuse, we press charges for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse." Melissa's breath caught. Adam stared at us, stunned, as if he couldn't fathom a world in which he didn't win. "We need time to think," he finally said, his voice tight. "You have until noon tomorrow," I replied. "After that, we go to the police." But he didn't need until noon. He left Melissa that night, cleaned out what little money they had left, abandoned her, the way he had abandoned us, and disappeared into whatever hole he thought might protect him. By the next morning, Melissa was on my doorstep, alone, tearful, pale, and ready to tell the truth. And when she confessed the Phoenix embezzlement, the manipulation, the fear, the guilt, I realized that she wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the monster either. She was someone who had been drowning for years in a marriage built on deception and coercion, and she had finally crawled toward the surface. What followed was a storm vandalism police involvement, a welfare check, Adam's desperate attempt to paint us as abusers. But Harold and I were ready. When Detective Rachel Boyd arrived, she saw the truth immediately. When Adam tried to twist the narrative, we handed over evidence he never imagined we had. When he attempted to blackmail Melissa with her own mistakes, she finally made the choice she should have made years earlier. She told the truth. And the truth set all of us free. Adam walked into our trap believing he was the smartest man in the room. He left in handcuffs after confessing to far more than he realized on a recorded line he thought he controlled. His storage unit revealed 10 years of predatory behavior, 6 other families he'd targeted, countless lives he'd quietly dismantled. Janine Lowe, his mistress, was arrested for assisting in the laundering, and Melissa, with the help of Detective Boyd and Susan Keller, began rebuilding her life from the wreckage. 6 months later, Harold moved into my home not as a burden, not as someone to care for, but as a partner in a friendship born from hardship. Melissa paid back the Phoenix money with our help. She began her restitution to us early, and Ella and Jacob filled my house with a laughter I thought I'd lost forever. On a quiet morning that summer, as I stood in my kitchen watching sunlight spill across the table, Harold handed me a newspaper with Adam's sentencing on the front page. 5 years for elder financial abuse, with federal charges still pending. I read the headline feeling not triumph, but something gentler closure. "You know what's strange?" Harold said, sipping his tea as the children played in the living room. "He thought he was tearing your family apart. But look around. Somehow, he ended up giving you a better one." I looked at Melissa working at her laptop with quiet determination, at the kids on the floor beside Harold, at the home that felt alive again. "No," I said softly. "We gave it to ourselves. By choosing honesty. By choosing each other. By choosing to stop pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I learned something through all of this. Truth can shatter, yes, but it can also rebuild. And sometimes, the family you become is stronger than the family you were." Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please like this video. Share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you know.